There are moments when ordinary life fractures without warning, when the routine motion of a normal day is pierced by something unthinkable, when a familiar space, a public space, becomes the setting for a tragedy that ripples far beyond the minutes in which it unfolded. On a cold December evening in New York City, in the heart of Manhattan, an 18-year-old college freshman walked through Morningside Park. It was early evening. The city moved as it always did, students heading home, families passing through, runners crossing paths on the winding trails. Nothing seemed unusual. But within minutes, that quiet routine shifted into shock. A sudden act of violence, swift, brutal, and devastating. A young life, full of ambition and creativity, cut short in a moment of panic, struggle, and fear. A park that had heard nothing more than footsteps and winter wind became the scene of a fatal attack that shook New York City, the academic world, and families across the country. The victim was Tessa Majors. The news spread with disbelief. A college freshman, just 18 years old, a musician, a writer, a student at Barnard College, filled with plans and potential, gone in a matter of moments. Her death ignited heartbreak, outrage, and confusion. Questions surged. How could something like this happen in a public park in Manhattan? Who was responsible? What led to such sudden and senseless violence? And as the silence settled over Morningside Park that night, investigators took their first steps into what would become one of the most closely followed murder cases in recent New York history. Before we continue, if you care about real stories that must never be forgotten, we invite you to subscribe. Your support helps ensure that these voices and these truths continue to be heard. Now, the discovery. Only minutes after the attack, passers-by noticed something was terribly wrong. A young woman, gravely injured, struggling to move, making her way toward an exit from the park near West 116th Street. The urgency of the moment collided with the cold reality of her condition. Multiple stab wounds, blood staining her clothes, breath fading. Emergency services were called. Witnesses could only describe a chaotic scene, confusion, desperation, and the harsh impact of an assault that had unfolded without warning. First responders arrived quickly, but the injuries were catastrophic. Despite medical efforts, she was pronounced dead soon after. And with that, the silence returned. A silence that settled across a community, a campus, and a city. A silence filled with shock, grief, and disbelief. As investigators secured the park, they began gathering the earliest traces of information, physical evidence from the scene, medical examination details, and any potential clues left behind during the struggle. A search was ordered of the surrounding area, including wooded slopes, staircases, and pathways. In those first hours, they worked against time. Daylight fading, the temperature falling, and questions piling faster than answers. And then came identity. The victim was confirmed as Tessa Majors, a freshman at Barnard College, living only a short distance from where she was attacked. To those who knew her personally, she was more than a headline. She was thoughtful, bright, and creative, a musician with a rising independent band, a student passionate about writing, journalism, and the arts, someone who had just begun her life in New York City, excited for the opportunities ahead. She had spent that day like any other college student, classes, everyday routines, and plans for the evening. Everything ordinary, everything normal. And it was this contrast, the normalcy leading up to the tragedy, that magnified the shock. One moment, a typical winter afternoon. The next, a violent crime that would leave permanent scars on a community. Soon, security footage and surveillance images from around the park and nearby streets became critical pieces in trying to understand what had happened. Cameras positioned along pathways and intersections were reviewed, analyzed, and collected as authorities began constructing a timeline that would eventually reach far beyond the night itself. This was the beginning of a case that would capture national attention, a case that would uncover a complex investigation, intense public discussion, arrests, confessions, legal battles, and ultimately, the pursuit of justice. And it all began here. The footsteps in the park, the silence that followed, the effort to reconstruct the final moments of a promising life. This is the story of the murder of Tessa Majors.
December 11th, 2019 began like a routine day for students across Manhattan. Classes were ending for the semester, schedules were shifting toward winter break, and Barnard College students prepared for final papers and exams. For first-year student Tessa Majors, the day unfolded with everyday normality. She attended classes, communicated with friends, and moved through her typical routine on campus. During the late afternoon, as daylight began to fade over Morningside Heights, the temperature dropped and the sun set early, marking the final hours before evening. At approximately early evening, Tessa walked from the Barnard campus area toward Morningside Park, a steep-sloped public park that runs between Morningside Drive and Manhattan Avenue, bordering Columbia University and Harlem. The park, known for its winding paths and staircases, had long been a shortcut for students traveling between neighborhoods and campuses. Nothing at that moment indicated what would soon unfold. Shortly after entering the park near a set of steps leading down into a lower area, an encounter occurred that turned violent. Authorities later stated that Tessa Majors was attacked and stabbed multiple times during a struggle. Investigators would determine through later testimony that the attack involved an attempted robbery, though the exact details of the struggle, the sequence of movements, and the precise location within the park became clearer only gradually as the investigation progressed. The confrontation was sudden. There was no warning, no buildup visible to bystanders, and no advance signal that a violent crime was about to take place. In a matter of seconds, the routine quiet of the park fractured. During the attack, Tessa, severely injured and losing blood, attempted to escape. Public accounts and investigative summaries describe her moving toward an exit staircase near West 116th Street, trying to reach help. Witnesses later recalled seeing a young woman struggling, appearing disoriented and wounded. The scene rapidly shifted into panic, an emergency situation unfolding in a location where many people assumed safety. For those who came upon the aftermath, there was confusion. Many initially did not understand the severity of her injuries. The urgency grew as it became clear she needed immediate medical attention. A 911 call was placed, reporting a young woman in distress, injured and bleeding heavily. The call triggered an emergency response, dispatching police and medical personnel to Morningside Park. The caller described the victim's condition, the visible signs of trauma, and her desperate attempt to seek help. The call initiated a chain of actions that would soon expand into one of the city's most intensive investigations of the year. As emergency responders moved toward the reported location, officers began a rapid search of the surrounding landscape. Morningside Park, with its layered terrain of stairs, wooded areas, and sloped paths, required careful inspection. Police searched for potential weapons, personal belongings, and any physical evidence left behind during the struggle. The search included nearby pathways, grassy slopes, and dense brush near the staircases. The crime scene was quickly secured with police tape as officers attempted to establish the boundaries of where the attack occurred and where the victim had traveled afterward. Flashlights cut through the dark areas inside the park, while investigators tried to piece together early details. New York City Police Department officers were among the first to respond, followed by paramedics. As the scene unfolded, officers recorded observations, spoke with individuals present, and tried to determine whether any witnesses had seen the confrontation itself. Initial information was limited and fragmented. No clear suspect description, no confirmed motive, and no understanding yet of how many individuals were involved. Within minutes, additional units were requested to enlarge the search perimeter and collect potential evidence. Paramedics arrived and began urgent treatment, but the severity of the injuries left little time or opportunity. Tessa was transported for urgent care, but shortly afterward, she was pronounced deceased. The official acknowledgement of her death marked the moment when an emergency call became a homicide investigation. Police presence increased rapidly, and news began to move quietly through campus and city channels before any public announcement was made. As officers continued canvassing the area, early questioning began with people located near the park, including nearby residents, individuals walking dogs, park-goers, and students passing through the area at the time. These early inquiries did not yet reveal a clear narrative, but they provided fragments: unusual movement in the park earlier that evening, the presence of young individuals near staircases, and potential sightings that would later help construct a timeline. Detectives also began reviewing body-worn camera recordings, emergency dispatch logs, and internal records to organize the first documented sequence of events. City officials released initial statements confirming that a homicide had occurred and that the victim was a Barnard College student. The news spread quickly across media outlets, triggering immediate public concern. Officials emphasized that the investigation was in its beginning stages and that no conclusions should be drawn until evidence was examined. The public reaction was immediate and intense: shock, sadness, confusion, and fear. The death of a college freshman in a public park near campus challenged assumptions about safety in an area heavily trafficked by students. Law enforcement assured that all possible resources were being mobilized to identify those responsible. In the first hours of the investigation, police recovered physical evidence from the scene, including items believed to be connected to the struggle. Authorities also began reviewing surveillance footage from multiple cameras around the park, nearby streets, and transit routes. This footage would soon become central to identifying potential suspects. Clothing fibers, biological evidence, and personal items were collected for forensic analysis. Officers also documented footprints and disturbances in soil and vegetation that could indicate movement patterns during or after the attack. These early clues were the first pieces in a complex puzzle, one that would rapidly expand into a high-profile investigation marked by intense public attention. At this point, there were more questions than answers. Who was involved? What had led to the confrontation? Was the attack planned or spontaneous? Was there more than one person present? The search for answers was now underway, driven by urgency and by the weight of a city demanding clarity. And within just days, the investigation would begin to focus on a new direction, one that would open the door to suspects, interrogations, surveillance video breakthroughs, and ultimately arrests that would reshape public understanding of the case. The investigation was only beginning.
In the days immediately following the murder of Tessa Majors, forensic specialists began the meticulous process of analyzing the evidence collected from Morningside Park. The crime scene had been carefully preserved, with investigators documenting every object, footprint, fiber, and trace material that could hold relevance. Among the primary focuses were biological samples that could potentially reveal DNA, clothing debris from the struggle, and any objects that might indicate the presence or movement of suspects. Forensic teams examined blood evidence to determine whether any belonged to individuals other than the victim. Specialists analyzed patterns in order to reconstruct the physical orientation and direction of motion during the confrontation. The steep terrain and heavily wooded areas presented challenges, but the search expanded beyond the initial location, extending through slopes, staircases, and walkways leading in and out of the area. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was cataloged for laboratory testing. Investigators then turned their attention to synthesizing early forensics with preliminary witness statements and emergency call details. As the timeline became clearer, analysts reviewed patterns of movement around the park, including estimated time windows referencing when the attack occurred and when Tessa was seen trying to reach help. Detectives compared physical evidence with the broader context of recent police activity in the area. Authorities publicly acknowledged that Morningside Park and nearby neighborhoods had experienced incidents involving attempted robberies by young individuals earlier in the year. This information helped shape early speculation that the attack may have stemmed from a robbery attempt that escalated violently, though no definitive conclusion was made at that time. Detectives began reviewing similar incidents to determine whether any patterns could offer insight into potential suspects or motives. The investigation soon expanded to include interviews with local youth who were known to frequent the park. Police officers questioned individuals from the surrounding area and from nearby schools. Public statements from law enforcement indicated that detectives began focusing on the possibility that multiple suspects may have been involved. Attention turned to adolescents believed to be in the vicinity at the time of the attack. Some youth who lived in nearby communities or were associated with local middle schools and high schools were brought in for questioning. At this stage, there were no arrests and no public naming of persons of interest. However, investigators reported that they were narrowing down individuals they believed could have knowledge of the incident. The publicly discussed motive early in the investigation centered primarily on robbery. Officials stated in initial briefings that they believed the attack occurred during an attempted theft based on forensic analysis and developing evidence. Online discussions and media reports emphasized that the public was trying to understand why such violence had erupted so abruptly and with such severity. Although robbery as a motive was widely reported, investigators continued examining alternative angles, acknowledging that it was too early to determine final conclusions. As detectives continued questioning individuals, information emerged indicating that some of the youth being interviewed were withholding details. Public reporting later described how investigators believed certain individuals knew more than they initially disclosed. This belief intensified scrutiny on groups of adolescents known to be in or around the park before and after the attack. Detectives began searching for inconsistencies in statements, attempting to identify who might have been directly involved and who might have been witnesses or bystanders afraid to speak. During follow-up interrogations, authorities encountered discrepancies in accounts. Different versions of events began to surface, some conflicting with physical evidence and timelines. Public sources later revealed that investigators suspected that certain young interview subjects were minimizing their involvement or concealing knowledge. These inconsistencies led police to examine social dynamics among the individuals questioned, exploring whether loyalty, fear, or self-protection contributed to statements that investigators believed may not have been fully truthful. As the investigation progressed, detectives reviewed patterns of movement and activity within the park in the days and weeks leading to the murder. This included reports of attempted robberies involving groups of youths, which investigators believed could provide contextual background for understanding the events of December 11. Data from school resource officers, neighborhood patrol logs, and community reports helped shape a growing picture, a pattern of group activity in the park that may have escalated into violent encounters. These connections did not yet identify specific individuals as responsible, but they helped guide investigative priorities. One of the most significant sources of emerging evidence came from surveillance video collected from the area surrounding Morningside Park. Detectives reviewed footage from park cameras, security systems, businesses, and transit points. Hours of video were analyzed frame by frame. In publicly released information, authorities described seeing images of several young individuals in the vicinity of the park near the time of the attack. Though the footage did not immediately provide clear facial identifications, it helped establish a movement timeline that supported witness accounts and refined suspect focus. Video evidence was cross-referenced with school attendance records, cell phone data, and transportation logs. A breakthrough occurred when investigators identified specific juveniles who were seen in surveillance footage around the time of the murder. This led detectives to concentrate on youth believed to be connected to peer groups known to spend time in Morningside Park.
Public reporting revealed that one individual eventually came forward, providing information that helped move the investigation toward identification efforts. This breakthrough did not resolve the case immediately, but it marked a turning point in which investigators shifted from broad inquiry to targeted questioning. The developing evidence, combined with information from surveillance, forensic analysis, and youth interviews, led police to follow a strong investigative lead: that multiple teenagers might have been involved in the attempted robbery and subsequent attack. This direction prompted renewed interviewing strategies, additional forensic testing, and increased coordination among investigative divisions. Public statements from officials emphasized that progress was being made, but details were limited due to the involvement of minors and the sensitivity of an active investigation. The community waited for answers. The public demanded clarity. And as pressure grew, the investigation intensified. Within days, the lead would open the path to a wave of interviews, confessions, public controversy, and eventually the arrests that would change the course of the case. This was the moment when the story moved beyond evidence collection and into the search for accountability.
As the investigation advanced, law enforcement intensified efforts to pursue every possible lead related to the murder of Tessa Majors. Detectives worked extended hours, expanding their investigative reach to schools, community centers, and neighborhoods surrounding Morningside Park. The search was no longer only about identifying unknown individuals. It was now about confirming involvement, clarifying conflicting accounts, and establishing a chain of events that led to the attack. Teams of investigators divided responsibilities, focusing on surveillance review, forensic analysis, and interviews with potential witnesses. Authorities emphasized publicly that they were committed to uncovering the truth, and that progress was being made. The investigation grew in size and urgency, driven by the emotional magnitude of the case and the pressure for resolution. The number of interviews expanded significantly. Detectives spoke with students, parents, teachers, and youth who frequently spent time in or near Morningside Park. Some individuals were interviewed multiple times as new details emerged or contradictions surfaced. Information began to align around groups of teenagers who were believed to have been present in the park on the evening of December 11th. Interviews included questions about movements before and after the attack, relationships among the teenagers involved, and knowledge of local incidents involving attempted robberies. Authorities worked carefully, aware of the legal sensitivities surrounding minors. Nonetheless, they remained firm in their intent to identify contributors or eyewitnesses who could help fill gaps in the timeline. As interviews continued, testimony began to take shape. Accounts from young individuals who provided partial narratives detailing the presence of teenagers in the park, their interactions, and the moments surrounding the fatal confrontation. Some testimonies aligned closely with one another, creating a consistent picture. Others raised new questions or conflicted with existing evidence. Investigators compared these statements against forensic data and surveillance video, searching for intersections that could be independently verified. With time, some accounts became central to the developing case. They offered structured sequences describing movement patterns, actions taken, and the presence of multiple individuals near the area where the attack occurred. Detectives also obtained access to official records that supported the investigation. These included school attendance logs, transportation information, municipal public safety reports, and administrative records that helped verify whether individuals questioned could have been present in Morningside Park that evening. Public information later confirmed that investigators also reviewed digital communication records when permitted by law, helping them understand interactions among the teenagers under scrutiny. These records became critical in refining the investigative framework and determining which individuals might have had relevant involvement or knowledge. An extensive archive of evidence grew rapidly. Thousands of pages of reports, hours of surveillance footage, forensic laboratory results, and logs from interviews and emergency responses. This expanding archive formed the backbone of the case. Its size reflected both the complexity and the seriousness of the investigation. The archive would later become central to court proceedings and sentencing hearings. Investigators conducted internal reenactments based on evidence to better understand the physical sequence of events in the park. Although this documentary uses narration only and presents no reenactment footage, it is important to note that law enforcement often uses controlled scene reconstruction to clarify spatial dynamics of crimes. These technical reenactments were intended to examine how the struggle may have unfolded, how movement aligned with forensic patterns, and how physical evidence supported or challenged statements given by witnesses and suspects. As more information surfaced, a clearer picture emerged suggesting the involvement of multiple juveniles. Public reporting later revealed that investigators had identified several teenagers believed to have participated in an attempted robbery. This revelation shifted the case dramatically and intensified public attention. The emerging narrative, supported by forensic evidence and testimony, indicated that the attack was not random but related to a robbery attempt that escalated into violence. Despite this progress, doubt persisted. Conflicting statements and partial truths raised questions about the exact roles of each teenager present. Some accounts differed significantly in describing who did what and when. Public criticism surfaced regarding the handling of juvenile interrogations and the difficulty of determining the full truth when statements changed over time. Online discussions questioned whether teenagers were motivated by fear, pressure, or misunderstanding when describing events. These doubts did not halt the investigation, but they emphasized the challenges law enforcement faced in identifying complete responsibility. Conflicts in testimony became a significant issue. Some teenagers who were interviewed provided statements that contradicted both physical evidence and each other. Investigators worked to determine which conflicts stemmed from intentional deception, which from confusion, and which from attempts to minimize personal involvement. This conflict fueled tension both inside interrogation rooms and throughout the community. Advocacy groups voiced concerns over legal fairness for juveniles, while others demanded swift accountability. The case became a point of public debate, balancing justice for the victim with the legal rights of minors. By this stage, pressure was building rapidly. The public demanded answers. Barnard College and Columbia University heightened security, while parents and students expressed fear and outrage. City officials pledged transparency and committed significant resources to the case. Tension increased dramatically as news outlets announced that police were closing in on suspects. Multiple juveniles were now believed to be connected to the attack, and investigators prepared to take their next major step. Arrests were imminent, and the course of the investigation was about to change, from pursuit, questioning, and uncertainty to confessions, charges, and courtroom proceedings that would capture national attention. As detectives narrowed in on suspects connected to the murder of Tessa Majors, the pressure surrounding the investigation grew rapidly. The case had become a focal point of public attention across New York City and throughout the country. Parents demanded answers, students expressed fear and anger. News outlets delivered continuous coverage, emphasizing the urgency to identify and arrest those responsible. City officials faced intense scrutiny as questions emerged about safety in and around Morningside Park. Concerns regarding policing, youth crime, and community responsibility became central topics in public forums and local government discussions. The pressure impacted every aspect of the investigation, pushing law enforcement to move swiftly and carefully. The expectation was clear. The community wanted closure. As media coverage intensified, online discussions grew rapidly. Social media platforms filled with speculation, analysis, and debate. Many individuals began trying to piece together timelines and potential suspects based on publicly available footage and reports. Photos, maps, rumors, and unverified information circulated widely. The case became a national obsession, with thousands of comments and posts attempting to reconstruct what happened and who might be involved. Public conversation stretched far beyond New York, turning the murder into a symbol of broader concerns about safety, juvenile crime, and campus vulnerability. Authorities urged restraint, reminding the public that the investigation was ongoing and that no assumptions should be made before official confirmation. As speculation rose, numerous theories spread online regarding the possible motives behind the attack. Some discussions centered around robbery, aligning with early statements from law enforcement. Other theories questioned whether the confrontation involved retaliation or escalation among youth groups in the area. These theories represented public discussion rather than established fact. Investigators focused on verifiable evidence while acknowledging the widespread desire for clarity from the public. Throughout this period, investigators encountered multiple false leads. Sightings, tips, rumors, and unofficial accounts sometimes directed attention toward individuals who ultimately had no connection to the crime. The intensity of interest created confusion, requiring investigators to distinguish between genuine evidence and misleading information. These red herrings slowed progress, but also highlighted the importance of precision in a case with such high stakes. The investigation reached a turning point when police detained a 13-year-old for questioning. Authorities announced that the juvenile had been interviewed in connection with the case and that the information obtained from him contributed significantly to understanding the events surrounding the murder. Public reporting later confirmed that the boy provided details describing an attempted robbery involving 3 youths. According to investigative summaries, his account stated that a struggle occurred and that one of the teenagers brandished a knife. This development marked a turning point. The case shifted from uncertainty to a rapidly unfolding sequence of arrests. As these details emerged, public debate intensified. Some online threads and community discussions questioned whether authorities were handling the case transparently, or whether the pressure to solve it quickly could lead to mistakes. The word conspiracy appeared frequently in commentary, describing how friendships among young individuals fractured under the weight of legal consequences. These descriptions represented public criticism and debate, not confirmed information from investigators. There were also public concerns about how statements from minors were being obtained. Some observers questioned whether peer pressure or fear may have influenced testimony. Advocates for juvenile justice raised worries about manipulation or coercion during interrogations. Law enforcement officials responded by stating that questioning procedures followed legal guidelines and were conducted with the appropriate oversight required when interviewing minors. This debate underscored the sensitive nature of the investigation. Public reaction intensified when reports surfaced that additional teenagers were implicated based on information provided by peers. The word betrayal surfaced frequently in commentary, describing how friendships among young individuals fractured under the weight of legal consequences. These reactions reflected community discourse, not official judicial conclusions. As investigators moved forward, more information became available. Authorities stated publicly that they had identified multiple juveniles believed to have been present at the scene or involved in the attempted robbery. Press coverage revealed that investigators were building cases based on DNA evidence, surveillance footage, and testimonies. This exposure heightened public attention even further, with national outlets following every development. Some online discussions and opinion commentary criticized various aspects of the investigation, raising questions about law enforcement decisions, policing strategies in the park, and broader systemic issues. The word corruption appeared in public debate, not in confirmed findings or legal rulings. officials continued to emphasize that all actions were being handled according to legal standards. As debate intensified, arrests progressed. Police soon announced the arrest of Rashawn Weaver, a 14-year-old at the time of the incident, identified as a suspect through investigative evidence. Another juvenile believed to have participated in the attempted robbery was also taken into custody and later entered legal proceedings related to the case. These arrests triggered nationwide media attention and ignited renewed public emotions: grief, anger, sympathy, and fear. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a student's life had now evolved into a complex legal process involving confessions, juvenile defendants, plea agreements, and courtroom proceedings that would stretch across years. Public pressure had finally met investigative resolution. The search for justice entered its next stage. The story was no longer just about what happened in Morningside Park.
As the case moved from the streets and interrogation rooms into the legal arena, it entered the judicial system, an environment built on procedure, evidence, and due process. Because the suspects were minors, the progression from investigation to courtroom required extreme legal care. The system would now determine how to balance accountability, rehabilitation, and justice for the victim. Court proceedings involving juvenile defendants follow a different structure than adult trials. Many hearings were closed or limited in detail, and legal protocols governed how information could be disclosed publicly. The system was under the microscope, watched closely by a grieving community and a nation seeking answers. Public criticism arose around decisions connected to youth crime prevention and safety in Morningside Park. Various voices questioned whether earlier incidents had been handled properly and if greater attention might have prevented the tragedy. These conversations framed concerns about possible mistakes at institutional levels, especially regarding public safety strategies and neighborhood policing approaches. These discussions were part of broader debate rather than confirmed findings about wrongdoing. Some commentators and online discussions suggested possibilities of withheld information or incomplete transparency during the early investigation. The word cover-up appeared frequently in public debate as speculations circulated online. Authorities maintained that legal constraints surrounding juvenile cases required limited disclosure. The public discourse reflected frustration, fear, grief, and the complexity of a case involving minors and a young victim whose name now echoed nationwide. The case sent a shockwave through New York City and the broader academic community. Barnard College held memorial events honoring the life of Tessa Majors. The shock resonated among students who mourned not just the loss of a peer, but of innocence, safety, and personal security. The campus atmosphere shifted dramatically. Conversations about safety became urgent, and fear reshaped daily routines. Information about the case moved rapidly through digital networks, online forums, news platforms, and archived documents. Digital reconstruction of events became a central part of public understanding, as video footage, police briefings, and legal records were shared and dissected in real time. Social media became a defining force in the public response. Posts from friends, classmates, and people who had never met Tessa expressed tribute, outrage, confusion, and grief. The case trended across multiple platforms, turning into a symbol of vulnerability and loss. The community response was emotional and intense. Vigils were held. Students, faculty members, artists, writers, and musicians gathered to remember Tessa and to support one another. Community leaders called for unity and healing while acknowledging the deep pain the tragedy had caused. The reaction from across the nation was immediate. Messages of condolence poured in from individuals, organizations, and schools. Editorials reflected on youth violence, public safety, and the emotional devastation inflicted on Tessa's family, friends, and classmates. The case touched people far beyond the boundaries of New York City. Images of memorials, moments of silence, and public gatherings circulated widely, becoming viral symbols of unity and grief. Her story reached global audiences. As proceedings continued, more insight emerged about the defendants' backgrounds and circumstances. Public reports referenced challenges faced by the teenagers involved and the difficult environments that shaped their lives. These insights fueled discussion around social issues, community support systems, and the complexities of juvenile crime. News outlets published profiles building a deeper picture of the teenagers charged. These profiles highlighted academic challenges, family situations,
and personal histories that raised difficult questions about youth resources and intervention. The identities of the juveniles were protected initially due to their age, but as legal proceedings advanced, key details became public. Among those charged was 14-year-old Rashawn Weaver, who prosecutors later stated was the individual responsible for stabbing Tessa Majors. Public reporting revealed backgrounds marked by instability, poverty, and exposure to violence. These factors became central talking points among advocates and commentators discussing juvenile justice and broader societal issues. The trauma caused by the crime extended far beyond the immediate loss. Students struggled with fear, parents anxiously questioned the safety of campuses, and community members expressed grief and shock. The trauma reverberated through classrooms, dormitories, families, and neighborhoods connected to the case. The darkness of the event, the suddenness, the youth of all involved, the brutality of the struggle shaped its legacy. It became a reminder of vulnerability in public spaces and the fragile nature of security. Fear spread throughout university campuses and surrounding communities. Students altered daily routines, avoided locations they once used freely, and demanded institutional reform. Many described a sense of isolation after the incident, a feeling that safety could vanish without warning. The city reevaluated how it addressed public safety, especially for students and minors. The perceived threat of youth violence became a major topic in local government, policing strategy discussions, and legal reform debates. Throughout legal proceedings, the motive, widely discussed, was attempted robbery. Prosecutors stated that the struggle escalated when Tessa resisted. Public conversation also interpreted the case as a tragic example of impulsive decisions among young individuals with limited awareness of consequences. In the days after the arrests, investigators revealed that some suspects had attempted to hide information or avoid detection. Statements evolved over time as more evidence was presented. The forensic trail, biological evidence, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and physical objects recovered from the park became central to prosecution arguments. Evidence built a clearer narrative, supported by multiple forms of corroboration. The discovery process in court demonstrated how investigators had traced the sequence of events. Legal developments included reversals in statements by defendants as plea negotiations began. Conflicting accounts gradually gave way to admissions of involvement, leading toward clarity. The trial was intense, emotional, and closely watched. Courtrooms were filled with reporters, attorneys, law enforcement officials, and grieving family members. Every detail carried weight. Although handled without sensationalism in legal settings, the court proceedings held inherent drama. The contrast between childhood and adult consequences, the grief of a family, and the clash of narratives regarding responsibility. A major break occurred when one juvenile defendant pled guilty to robbery charges connected to the case. This marked a turning point that led to further guilty pleas and eventually to formal sentencing. In December 2021, Rashawn Weaver pled guilty to murder in the second degree and robbery. He was sentenced in court to 14 years to life in prison. Another defendant involved in the robbery was sentenced to several years in juvenile detention, while a third received a negotiated sentence due to cooperation. The case concluded with formal sentencing, a legal acknowledgement of responsibility, and the beginning of lengthy consequences for those convicted. Justice within the system had reached resolution. But justice in the emotional sense remained more complicated. Pain does not disappear when a sentence is pronounced. Lives do not return. Communities do not forget.
The sentencing of those responsible for the murder of Tessa Majors marked the legal conclusion of the case. In the courtroom, the path of justice completed its formal arc. Arrests, charges, guilty pleas, and final decisions handed down by the judge. For many, it provided a measure of accountability, a confirmation that those involved in the violent attack had been held responsible through the court system. But justice, in its deeper human sense, extended far beyond legal terminology. It was tied to healing, remembrance, and the long-term effects of a crime that changed countless lives. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was solemn and heavy. Family members of Tessa Majors listened as the details of the crime were described and as sentencing decisions were read out. Victim impact statements expressed the profound loss felt by loved ones, pain that could not be measured by years or legal terms. Prosecutors emphasized the gravity of the offense, while defense attorneys spoke about youth,
environment, and the lifelong consequences of decisions made in a matter of seconds. The courtroom became a place where grief and accountability met, layered and complex. Legal strategy shaped the proceedings from both sides. Prosecutors built their case on forensic evidence, surveillance footage, witness testimony, and statements that emerged during the investigation. Defense teams focused on the age of the defendants, arguing that adolescence and background should inform sentencing approaches. The strategy reflected the difficult balance between punishment and the possibility of rehabilitation when dealing with juveniles. Throughout the legal process, public opinion remained divided. Commentators across news platforms debated the outcomes, with some expressing relief at the sentences and others questioning aspects of the legal handling of minors. In this crossfire of perspectives, emotions ran high. The courtroom itself, however, remained anchored in law, not commentary. The verdicts and guilty pleas represented the conclusion of the formal pursuit for accountability. Each decision carried weight, both for the community seeking closure and for the families of the defendants absorbing the reality of long-term consequences. The legal decisions delivered finality, in the judicial sense, even as emotional finality remained elusive. In the aftermath, the case continued to produce ripple effects. Discussions intensified over youth support programs, public safety in parks, and preventative measures. Policy debates emerged around policing strategies and community-based intervention efforts. The case became a reference point in conversations about protection, vulnerability, and responsibility. Barnard College and Columbia University implemented expanded safety measures, including increased security patrols and improved lighting around Morningside Park. Students reorganized routines, adapting to changed perceptions of safety. For those who knew Tessa personally, the aftermath was defined not by policy but by absence. An empty chair, an unfinished song, a silence where someone once stood. Her loss was deeply felt by both who knew her and by many who only came to learn her name after her death. For the Majors family, closure could never be complete. Court proceedings delivered accountability, but nothing could restore a life full of promise. The concept of closure remained an ongoing process, carried through memory, reflection, and the support of community. Reflecting on the tragedy brings forward the contrast that defined Tessa's story. A young woman full of ambition and creativity, living a normal day filled with ordinary moments, whose life ended in sudden violence. It raises questions about vulnerability, youth, opportunity, and risk. Reflection extends too to the teenagers who received sentences, young lives altered forever by choices that became irreversible in a matter of moments. The impact of the case reshaped an entire community. Students, families, educators, policymakers, and citizens across the country felt the weight of what happened. Tessa's death transformed conversations about safety and responsibility, prompting changes intended to prevent future tragedies. Her name became a reminder, a call for awareness, vigilance, and empathy. The memory of Tessa Majors lives on through her music, her writing, and the stories shared by those who loved her. Her work, spirit, and identity continue to echo beyond the tragedy that ended her life. Tributes appear across campuses, communities, and online spaces, ensuring she is remembered as more than a victim, remembered as an artist, a student, a daughter, a friend. The questions left behind continue to haunt many. What could have prevented this? How do we protect young people? How does a community heal from trauma of this scale? These questions do not disappear with time. They linger, challenging society to respond. The case reached legal resolution, but emotional resolution remains ongoing. The sentences provide consequence, but not restoration. The search for meaning continues long after the courtroom emptied. The message that emerges from this tragedy carries weight. Every life is valuable, violence leaves permanent scars, and prevention matters. It asks communities to act, not only in reaction to tragedy, but in pursuit of safety and support. Awareness grew from this crime. Awareness of vulnerability in public spaces, awareness of youth caught in cycles of violence, and awareness of the need for connection and intervention before actions become irreversible. Tessa's story became part of a larger call to attention. The legal process reached its final stage, but the ending is not a clean break. The impact will continue to be felt for years through families, institutions, and public memory. The finality exists only in the documents and the sentencing record, not in the hearts of those affected. The echoes of this tragedy will continue across time, echoes reminding us of fragility, responsibility, and the cost of violence. Echoes urging communities to protect their young and support those who need direction. Echoes carrying the name of an 18-year-old whose life was full of possibility. This is the story of the murder of Tessa Majors, an unforgettable tragedy in the heart of New York City that reshaped the community and left a permanent mark on countless lives. A story about loss, accountability, and the enduring power of memory. If this documentary has moved you, we invite you to share it so that the story is not forgotten. By remembering, we honor the life that was taken too soon, and we strengthen the awareness that may protect others in the future. Thank you for watching, and may we never forget.